As the 21st century dawned, several pivotal events reshaped the landscape of the Middle East, leaving an indelible mark on the Iran-Israel conflict. In 2003, the United States, with strong Israeli support, invaded Iraq, deposing Saddam Hussein and ending decades of Ba'athist rule. While the immediate impact of the war was significant, it was the aftermath that truly proved consequential. The vacuum of power left by Saddam's removal allowed Iranian influence to surge in Iraq, much to Israel's consternation. Iran began extending its reach by supporting various Shia militias within Iraq, gradually forming a formidable network along the Iraq-Syria border. These militias, many of them backed by Iran's elite Quds force, served as a bulwark against American and Israeli interests in the region. The establishment of a permanent U.S. military presence in Iraq further fueled Iranian anxieties, intensifying its perceived need to push American influence back. Concurrently, the Syrian civil war erupted in 2011. Initially, it seemed an internal conflict, but Iran swiftly recognized the strategic implications. With Bashar al-Assad's regime teetering, Iran feared the emergence of another Sunni Arab state hostile to its interests. Thus, Iran threw its weight behind Assad, providing crucial military aid and deploying its own forces, thus stemming any momentum for major rebel gains. This move resulted in a major escalation of Iranian influence in Syria, a development that sent shockwaves through Israel, which faced an expanding Iranian-backed Shia arc, stretching from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. Faced with what it saw as an existential threat, Israel took a proactive approach. In September 2007, Israel embarked on a series of airstrikes in Syria, targeting advanced weapon systems suspected of being destined for Hezbollah. These strikes sent a clear message to Iran. Israel was willing to act unilaterally when its interests were threatened. Tensions continued to rise, pushing the two nations closer to a direct confrontation. In 2011, Israeli commandos conducted an audacious daytime raid on a beach near the Syrian city of Latakia, killing several militants. The target, a shipment of advanced Russian anti-ship missiles that could potentially threaten Israeli naval vessels. This brazen move signaled Israel's determination to secure its interests against Iranian entrenchment. Amid these escalating tensions, the issue of Iran's nuclear program became a point of contention. Iran's drive to acquire nuclear technology raised serious alarms in Israel and the West, leading to international sanctions. However, Iran remained resolute, viewing its nuclear program as a vital national interest and a source of pride. Despite the pressure, Iran pressed ahead, enriching uranium and defying UN Security Council resolutions. As Israeli concerns mounted, so did speculation about a possible Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Such an attack, fraught with risk and potential consequences, loomed as a stark possibility, raising the specter of a full-blown regional war. In recent years, Israel has carried out hundreds of airstrikes on targets within Syria, primarily aiming at Iranian-backed forces and advanced weaponry. These strikes, shrouded in secrecy, have dramatically escalated since 2011, signaling Israel's growing alarm over Iran's activities near its borders. Perhaps the most audacious was the 2018 elimination of a top Iranian nuclear scientist. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, widely seen as the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program. His death near Tehran, attributed to Israel's Mossad service, highlights the lengths Israel is willing to go to counter Iranian threats. On May 7, 2021, a powerful explosion rocked the port of Beirut, causing widespread damage and loss of life. Amid the devastation, attention focused on 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored improperly in a warehouse, leading to the largest non-nuclear explosion in modern history. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident soon became embroiled in controversy. Questions arose regarding the government's awareness and negligence in handling the hazardous material. But lurking beneath the surface was a darker possibility. Some speculated that the blast might have been an Israeli cyber attack on Iranian assets in the port, targeting Iranian weapons shipments transiting through Lebanon. While no definitive proof exists, the timing and nature of the blast fuels suspicions, especially considering Iran's extensive use of civilian infrastructure for military purposes. The connection to Iran is further complicated by a separate incident. On July 9, 2021, an Israeli drone struck a building housing Iran's Revolutionary Guards in downtown Beirut, underscoring the increasing boldness of Israeli strikes on Lebanese soil. In response, Hezbollah fired anti-tank missiles at the Israeli border fence, prompting retaliatory Israeli strikes on Hezbollah positions. This tit-for-tat highlights the precarious balance between the two nations and the potential for miscalculation to spiral into open conflict. The backdrop of these strikes is Iran's continued defiance over its nuclear program, which now involves stockpiling enriched uranium and operating advanced centrifuges. This defiance has led to a drastic reduction in U.S. sanctions relief in recent months, bringing the country closer to the brink of economic collapse. As Israel faces an increasingly belligerent Iranian regime with nuclear aspirations, its concerns have intensified. Many Israeli officials view the current situation as precarious, worrying that the window for a strike on Iran's nuclear sites may be rapidly closing. The United States, Israel's staunchest ally, complicates matters. While publicly committed to Israel's security, the U.S. has pursued diplomatic channels with Iran, including the now stalled 2015 nuclear deal. This has left Israel feeling isolated and apprehensive about potential American objections or constraints on its actions. Moreover, the volatile situation in Syria adds another layer of complexity. With Iranian forces deeply entrenched there, striking Iran's nuclear facilities without igniting a broader regional war seems almost impossible. Despite this, Israel's hardline stance against Iran remains unwavering, even as some advocate for a more measured response. The stage is set for a potential showdown, yet the outcome remains uncertain. The looming possibility of a conflict between Iran and Israel has been a constant shadow over the region for decades. Unlike traditional conflicts with identifiable battlefronts, the clash between these two nations takes place on multiple covert fronts. It's a battle of proxies, cyber attacks, targeted killings, and veiled threats. As we've seen, Israel has responded aggressively to Iranian entrenchment in Syria, carrying out hundreds of airstrikes to push back Iranian forces and destroy weapons shipments. These actions are met with retaliatory attacks from Iran and its proxies, such as Hezbollah and Hamas, creating a dangerous cycle of tit-for-tat violence. Iran's nuclear program has further escalated tensions. For Israel, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is deemed an existential threat, driving calls for preemptive strikes. However, such action carries severe risks of sparking a wider regional war. Even a limited engagement could trigger responses from Iran's proxies across the region, drawing in key players like the United States and Russia. In this context, the chances of a large-scale conflict seem alarmingly high. An unintended consequence of Israel's strikes against Iran and its allies in Syria has been the inadvertent strengthening of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has evolved from a small Lebanon-based Shia militia into a formidable fighting force with an arsenal that rivals some national armies. Its leader, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, frequently boasts about the group's capabilities and has threatened to target not only Israel but major U.S. bases in the region. The group's growing strength poses a significant challenge to Israel, diverting valuable resources to the northern border and influencing Lebanese politics. Adding to the complexity is the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which provides Iran with another front to exploit. Iran supports Palestinian groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which regularly engage in hostilities with Israel, drawing Israel into a two-front war scenario. It is precisely this web of interconnected conflicts that makes any large-scale confrontation between Iran and Israel so disastrous. The spillover effects could draw in regional powers like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, while igniting unrest among the Muslim populations in Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. Furthermore, the involvement of global powers like the United States and Russia adds another layer of danger. U.S. support for Israel's security could escalate into direct military intervention, while Russia's presence in Syria gives it leverage to influence events there. The prospect of a miscalculation triggering a wider conflict involving global powers is a chilling possibility. To better understand the ramifications of an Iran-Israel war, it's crucial to consider how it would reverberate across the globe, impacting not just the region, but the entire international order. A conflict of this magnitude would send ripples felt across every facet of global affairs, from energy markets to international diplomacy. Here's a glimpse into the potential fallout. Economically, the immediate impact would likely be felt in energy markets. Disruptions to oil supplies from the Gulf region, coupled with the potential for wider hostilities, could lead to price spikes that would shake global economies still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Financial markets, already sensitive to geopolitical shifts, would experience turbulence, with investors seeking safety in more stable assets. Industries reliant on steady energy prices, such as manufacturing and transportation, would be hit hard, potentially slowing global economic growth and derailing recovery efforts. The humanitarian toll would be devastating. Beyond the immediate casualties, millions could be displaced, fleeing the violence to seek refuge in neighboring countries. This influx would strain resources, potentially leading to new conflicts and humanitarian crises in neighboring regions. Access to basic services like healthcare and education would likely diminish, exacerbating existing inequalities and hindering development. Politically, such a conflict would have profound implications. International diplomacy, already strained by the pandemic and other conflicts, could fracture further as nations align themselves with competing sides. The United Nations, tasked with maintaining global security and stability, would face a critical test, either stepping up to play a significant role in conflict resolution or risking further marginalization. The conflict between Iran and Israel is not just geopolitical, it is deeply ideological. At the heart of their enmity lies a clash of identities and worldviews that leave little room for reconciliation. Israel was founded as a Jewish state after World War II, rooted in Zionism nationalist movement aimed at establishing a homeland for the Jewish people. Iran, on the other hand, became a revolutionary Shia Islamic republic in 1979. Defined by its opposition to Western imperialism, secularism, and Zionism. This ideological confrontation is a primary reason why the conflict has persisted for decades, often immune to the logic of diplomacy or pragmatic compromise. Each state sees the existence and actions of the other not only as a strategic threat, but as a moral and existential affront to its own values and legitimacy. To the Iranian regime, Zionism is a Western colonial project implanted in the heart of the Islamic world. From Ayatollah Khomeini's earliest writings, Zionism was portrayed as a tool of oppression and domination, one that displaced Muslim Palestinians and desecrated Islamic holy sites. Khomeini went further than most Arab leaders in calling for the complete destruction of the Israeli state, branding it a cancerous tumor that must be removed from the region. The Islamic Republic's constitution and official rhetoric place resistance to Zionism as a central tenet of its foreign policy. Iran does not recognize Israel and prohibits any diplomatic, commercial, or cultural contact. The annual Quds Day, established by Khomeini, is a global event calling for the liberation of Jerusalem and often includes calls for Israel's destruction. For Israel, this isn't just offensive, it's existential. Unlike its disputes with Arab states, which have been based on borders or refugees, Iran's stance rejects the very right of Israel to exist. Israeli leaders, particularly from the right-wing political spectrum, interpret Iranian rhetoric and actions as genocidal in nature, especially in light of Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas that attack Israeli civilians. Religion plays a crucial role in deepening the divide. Iran is a Shia Muslim majority nation, while most Arab states and Islamist movements have historically been Sunni. Yet in opposing Israel, Iran has managed to build bridges across the sectarian divide, positioning itself as the vanguard of Islamic resistance. This has allowed Iran to appeal to broader Muslim sentiment by framing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a religious duty rather than merely a political struggle. Iran's leaders often cite Quranic justifications for resisting Israel, portraying it as a sacred mission to protect Islamic lands and people from occupation and injustice. However, this religious framing also puts Iran at odds with Muslim-majority nations that have made peace with Israel or maintain neutral stances. Iran brands these regimes as traitors or puppets of the West. The ideological war thus expands beyond Israel and Iran to encompass a broader regional struggle for the soul of Islam and the future of the Middle East, one of the most tangible expressions of Iran's ideology is its material support for armed resistance movements against Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon is perhaps the most successful example. Created in the 1980s with Iranian assistance. Hezbollah's very identity is rooted in Islamic resistance to Israel, as presence in Lebanon and support for Palestinian liberation. The group openly declares that its mission is to destroy the Zionist regime, and its 2006 war with Israel, while devastating for Lebanon, was celebrated in Iran as a victory for resistance. Iran also funds and arms Hamas, despite the group's Sunni Islamist roots. Over time, ideological differences have been set aside in favor of a shared goal: undermining and eventually eliminating Israel. Iran provides Hamas with rockets, money, training, and political support, especially during times of conflict with Israel. This has turned Gaza into a key front in the broader Iran-Israel struggle. Through these proxies, Iran exerts influence directly on Israel's borders while maintaining plausible deniability. Hezbollah's missile arsenal, Hamas rocket barrages, and Islamic Jihad's suicide bombers are all seen by Israel as extensions of Iranian policy. The Israeli government, in turn, views Iran not only as a state adversary, but as the orchestrator of a decentralized war of attrition. Over the years, opposition to Israel has become a core part of the Islamic Republic's identity, used both to unify its people and to legitimize its leadership. In times of domestic unrest, Iran's leaders often invoke the external threat of Israel and the Zionist Western alliance as a means of rallying nationalist and religious support. This strategy also allows Iran to lead what it calls the axis of resistance, a coalition of states and non-state actors united in opposition to Israel and American influence in the region. This axis includes Syria, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and various Shia militias in Iraq and Yemen. Iran's support for this axis reinforces its ideological leadership among those who reject normalization with Israel. Israel, for its part, sees itself as a democratic outpost in a hostile region, constantly defending its right to exist. The threat from Iran is not only ideological, but strategic. The prospect of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons, combined with its support for terrorist groups and calls for Israel's destruction, has led Israeli leaders to adopt a policy of aggressive deterrence. This policy is sometimes called the Begin Doctrine, named after Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who in 1981 ordered the destruction of Iraq as a Surik nuclear reactor to prevent Saddam Hussein from acquiring nuclear weapons. The same logic applies to Iran. Israel has vowed to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear-armed state by any means necessary. Israeli leaders across the political spectrum, from Benjamin Netanyahu to Yitzhak Rabin, have warned that Iran's ideology makes it uniquely dangerous. While some other adversaries may be deterred by the threat of retaliation, Iran's revolutionary zealand, its willingness to sacrifice in the name of ideology, makes it less predictable and more dangerous. Both nations engage in sophisticated propaganda campaigns aimed at demonizing the other. Iranian state media frequently portrays Israel as an illegitimate regime built on bloodshed, often invoking Holocaust denial or conspiracy theories about Zionist control of global politics. This narrative is disseminated through satellite TV, online platforms, and sympathetic media in the Arab world. Israel, in turn, highlights Iran's human rights abuses, its suppression of dissent, and its role in regional instability. Israeli officials often speak directly to the Iranian people via social media, encouraging them to rise against their government. This battle of narratives adds another layer to the conflict, one that plays out in global forums, public discourse, and the information space. The ideological divide between Iran and Israel transforms their conflict into something far more dangerous than a traditional geopolitical rivalry. Both sides perceive the conflict in existential terms. Iran believes it cannot be true to its revolutionary principles without opposing Israel. Israel believes it cannot ensure the safety of its citizens without neutralizing the Iranian threat. This zero-sum logic makes compromise extremely difficult. Any peace agreement that allows the other side to exist or thrive is seen as a betrayal of core values. This is why peace talks or diplomatic outreach, no matter how promising, often collapse under the weight of ideology. The ideological hostility between Iran and Israel has not remained confined to speeches or slogans. Over the past 4 decades, this animosity has spilled into proxy wars, missile strikes, cyber attacks, and assassinations. While both countries avoid direct warfare, they have engaged in a growing number of indirect confrontations that form what many analysts now call a shadow war. Below are some of the most significant flashpoints that have escalated the Iran-Israel conflict into a deadly and persistent geopolitical feud. Iran's support for Hezbollah was one of the earliest and most important moves in the shadow war against Israel. Formed during Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon, Hezbollah grew rapidly with the help of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which established training camps and sent advisors to southern Lebanon. Hezbollah's ideology, tactics, and weapons all bore Iranian fingerprints. Over the next decades, the group carried out numerous attacks on Israeli soldiers, especially during Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon. The 1992 and 1994 bombings of the Israeli Embassy and Jewish Community Center in Argentina, which killed over 100 people, were blamed on Hezbollah, with Iranian support allegedly involved. By the late 1990s, Hezbollah had emerged not just as a local militia, but as a fully armed state within a state. With thousands of rockets aimed at northern Israel and a deeply entrenched base in Lebanon, Hezbollah gave Iran a potent tool to strike Israel indirectly. One of the most defining moments in modern Israeli-Iranian hostility came in July 2006, when Hezbollah kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers in a cross-border raid. Israel responded with a full-scale military campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon, launching airstrikes and a ground invasion. The war lasted 34 days and resulted in over 1,000 deaths, most of them Lebanese civilians. Hezbollah fired more than 4,000 rockets into Israeli territory, reaching as far as Haifa. Though Israel inflicted heavy damage on Hezbollah infrastructure, the group survived and claimed a symbolic victory. Iran publicly celebrated Hezbollah's resistance, and its regional prestige soared. The war marked a shift. Israel had long known about Hezbollah, but this conflict exposed just how advanced, disciplined, and deadly Iran's proxy had become. Israeli strategists began to view Iran's influence in Lebanon as a direct extension of the Islamic Republic's military doctrine. Since the early 2000s, the most explosive issue in the Israel-Iran conflict has been Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Iran insists its program is peaceful and geared toward civilian energy production. Israel and many in the West disagree. Iran's clandestine enrichment facilities, refusal to grant full access to international inspectors, and development of missile technology have all fueled Israeli fears of a nuclear-armed Iran. Successive Israeli governments have stated clearly they will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons under any circumstances. This doctrine led to a series of covert operations aimed at sabotaging Iran's nuclear infrastructure. These included Stuxnet, a sophisticated cyber-attic, reportedly developed jointly by the US and Israel, targeted Iran's Natanz nuclear facility and damaged centrifuges. Assassinations. Several Iranian nuclear scientists were killed in mysterious circumstances. While Israel has not confirmed responsibility, Iran openly blames the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. Natanz explosions. A series of unexplained fires and explosions rocked Iranian nuclear sites. Analysts suspect Israeli sabotage operations. The back and forth created an atmosphere of paranoia and mutual suspicion. Iran hardened its facilities and ramped up uranium enrichment. Israel continued to press world powers, especially the United States, to take decisive action, often warning that time was running out. The outbreak of Syria's civil war in 2011 created a new and dangerous theater for the Iran-Israel conflict. As President Bashar al-Assad's regime struggled to survive, Iran stepped in with financial support, troops, and militia forces from Iraq and Afghanistan. The IRGC and Hezbollah fighters helped turn the tide of the war in Assad's favor. For Israel, this was deeply troubling. Iran was no longer just using Lebanon as a proxy front, it was building a military foothold in neighboring Syria. Over time, Iranian forces constructed missile depots, drone bases, and command centers across Syria, especially near the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel responded with hundreds of airstrikes, targeting Iranian personnel, weapons shipments, and Syrian bases, housing Iranian assets. These operations, rarely acknowledged by Israel in detail, were designed to prevent what Israeli officials call the next war, one in which Iran could launch. Multi-front attacks from Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. Some of the most notable events include 2018 to 2022. Operation Chariots of Fire. Dozens of Israeli airstrikes targeted Iranian and Hezbollah positions deep inside Syria. Drone and missile attacks. Iran-backed groups in Syria and Iraq launched drones at Israeli targets. Most were intercepted, but some reached military bases or civilian areas. This indirect war has turned Syria into a battleground between two determined adversaries, both wary of escalation but unwilling to back down. Beyond the Middle East, Iran and its proxies have also targeted Israeli and Jewish interests globally. These incidents are less frequent but symbolically powerful, showing Iran's reach and willingness to strike far beyond its borders. Examples include Bulgaria bus bombing. A Hezbollah operative detonated a bomb on a bus carrying Israeli tourists, killing 6 people. Foiled plots. Numerous plots against Israeli embassies and Jewish community centers have been thwarted in countries like Thailand, India, Georgia, and Cyprus. Israel has responded by increasing diplomatic pressure and covert operations. The Mossad has been active across Europe, the Middle East, and even Africa in identifying and neutralizing Iranian plots. A pivotal moment that drew global attention to the shadow war came on January 3, 2020, when the United States assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, head of Iran's elite Quds force, in a drone strike near Baghdad International Airport. Soleimani was considered the architect of Iran's regional military strategy, including support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and militias in Iraq and Syria. Though the strike was carried out by the U.S., Israel reportedly provided intelligence and logistical support. Iran vowed revenge and launched missile attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, but stopped short of a full-scale escalation. However, the killing further hardened Iran's resolve to expand its deterrent power, including its missile and drone capabilities. Soleimani's death also highlighted the intricate ties between the United States, Israel, and Iran's adversaries, blurring the line between regional conflicts and global power plays. In 2020, Israel signed normalization agreements with several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. These Abraham Accords marked a significant diplomatic shift in the Middle East. For Iran, this was deeply alarming. Arab countries that once rejected Israel's legitimacy were now engaging in open relations and cooperation. Iran denounced the agreements as betrayals of the Palestinian cause and accused the Gulf states of aligning with Zionism and U.S. imperialism. Israel, for its part, gained greater access to regional markets, intelligence sharing, and potentially new military partnerships aimed at containing Iran. In response, Iran increased support for groups opposing the accords and expanded its military cooperation with anti-Israel elements in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Iran's support for Palestinian factions became most visible during major conflicts in Gaza. 2014 Gaza War. Hamas and Islamic Jihad fired thousands of rockets at Israeli cities. Iran provided funding, training, and technology, including long-range rockets. May 2021 conflict. A new round of violence erupted after tensions in Jerusalem. Over 4,000 rockets were fired from Gaza, and Israeli airstrikes pounded Hamas infrastructure. Iranian leaders hailed the attacks and vowed continued support. 2023 and beyond. Iran has helped Hamas develop local rocket production capabilities, making it harder for Israel to block the supply chain. The Islamic Republic continues to train fighters and supply electronic warfare tools and surveillance equipment. Israel sees each Gaza war not as a local uprising, but as a proxy battle with Iran, a war behemoth fought through militants who share Iran's ideology and funding. These key moments of escalation have defined the modern Iran-Israel conflict. What began as ideological opposition has evolved into a sophisticated global confrontation fought in cyberspace, proxy battlegrounds, and covert intelligence arenas. The level of tension today is perhaps higher than ever, with both nations heavily armed, deeply entrenched, and locked in a confrontation that shows no sign of resolution. Few issues in the Middle East have generated as much fear, international diplomacy, and potential for war as Iran's nuclear program. For Israel, the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran represents not just a strategic challenge, but an existential threat. For Iran, nuclear development is a symbol of sovereignty, scientific progress, and some argue a necessary deterrent in a hostile region. Over the last 2 decades, this clash over Iran's nuclear ambitions has emerged as the single most volatile flashpoint in Israeli-Iranian relations. It is the dimension where ideological hostility meets the terrifying prospect of weapons of mass destruction. And at the heart of it lies a brutal calculus: deterrence, survival, and the possibility of preemptive war. Iran's nuclear program dates back to the 1950s, under the Shah's reign, with support from the United States under the Atoms for Peace initiative. With U.S. assistance, Iran built its first research reactor and laid plans for a civilian nuclear energy infrastructure. However, after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the program was frozen and Western nations halted cooperation. Yet by the mid-1980s, Iran quietly resumed nuclear research. Driven by fear of regional threats, especially Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which had already used chemical weapons against Iran in their brutal 8-year war. During the 1990s and 2000s, Iran expanded its nuclear efforts. Facilities like Natanz and Fordo were built, enriching uranium beyond the needs of civilian energy. These actions triggered alarm bells across the West, but especially in Israel. By the early 2000s, the International Atomic Energy Agency began raising concerns. Iran insisted its program was peaceful, but refused to fully comply with inspections. Evidence of secret enrichment sites, weaponization studies, and missile tests fueled suspicions that Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons under the guise of civilian research. To Israel, a nuclear Iran is not just unacceptable, is unthinkable. With a population of under 10 million, concentrated in a small geographic area, Israel views a single nuclear strike as potentially devastating. Iranian leaders' repeated threats to wipe Israel off the map have only sharpened this fear. Successive Israeli prime ministers from Ariel Sharon to Ehud Olmert to Benjamin Netanyahu have declared Iran's nuclear program a red line. Netanyahu in particular made it a centerpiece of Israeli foreign policy, famously drawing a cartoon bomb at the United Nations in 2012 to illustrate how close Iran was to developing a nuclear warhead. Israel believes that even if Iran never uses a nuclear weapon, possessing one would embolden Tehran's regional aggression. It would give Iran cover to act more forcefully in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Gaza. It could also trigger a regional arms race, prompting countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey to seek nuclear capabilities of their own. Faced with the perceived threat of a nuclear Iran, Israel has not remained idle. Instead, it launched a years-long shadow campaign to sabotage, disrupt, and delay Iran's nuclear ambitions through covert means. These include Stuxnet, in one of the most sophisticated cyber operations ever uncovered. The United States and Israel jointly developed the Stuxnet Warma malware program designed to sabotage Iran's nuclear centrifuges at Natanz. The virus caused centrifuges to spin out of control and break down, delaying Iran's enrichment capability without a single shot being fired. Stuxnet revealed the new frontier of warfare cyberattacks that could cripple a nation's infrastructure from afar. Iran accused Israel and vowed retaliation, setting off a chain of cyber skirmishes that continues today. 2. Assassination of scientists. Between 2010 and 2012, several Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated by unknown assailants. Most were killed by car bombs or gunmen on motorcycles. Iran directly blamed Israel's Mossad, though Israel never confirmed its involvement. These targeted killings were aimed at slowing Iran's technical progress by removing key personnel. While controversial, the operations were highly effective in instilling fear and disrupting continuity. 3. Explosions and fires. A series of mysterious explosions damaged critical Iranian nuclear and missile facilities, including a major fire at Natanz in July 2020. Analysts widely believe these incidents were caused by Israeli sabotage, cyber or physical. Though Iran vowed to rebuild, the repeated strikes showed that Israel had deep intelligence and operational capabilities inside Iran's borders. Iran's leadership has repeatedly stated that it does not seek nuclear weapons, pointing to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's religious fatwa against nuclear arms. However, many analysts argue this claim is strategic rather than sincere. Iran likely sees nuclear capability as a way to deter external attack, particularly from Israel or the U.S. assert regional power. A nuclear umbrella could embolden Iran's regional proxies and harden its position in negotiations, counterbalance Israeli dominance. Israel is widely believed to possess an undeclared nuclear arsenal of over 80 to 100 warheads. Iran's nuclear strategy may aim for threshold status, the ability to build a weapon quickly without actually doing so. This ambiguity keeps adversaries guessing while avoiding full international backlash. In 2015, after years of negotiations, Iran reached a historic agreement with 6 world powers: the US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Under the deal, Iran agreed to limit uranium enrichment to 3.67% purity, reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium, dismantle thousands of centrifuges, allow intrusive IAEA inspections in exchange. International sanctions were lifted, freeing up billions in Iranian assets and oil revenues. The deal was hailed as a diplomatic triumph, except in Israel. Israel opposed the JCPOA from the beginning. Prime Minister Netanyahu argued that the deal merely delayed Iran's progress and lacked sufficient enforcement mechanisms. He claimed it gave Iran a path to a bomb once the restrictions expired, while providing it with the economic resources to fund terrorism and missile development. In a dramatic moment in 2015, Netanyahu addressed the U.S. Congress without an invitation from the sitting. President Barack Obama urged lawmakers to reject the deal. While his speech was cheered by Republicans, it caused a serious rift between the Israeli and U.S. administrations. Israel also launched intelligence operations to discredit the deal. In 2018, the Mossad carried out a daring raid in Tehran, stealing thousands of files related to Iran's nuclear program. Netanyahu presented the documents in a live broadcast, claiming they proved Iran's deception and hidden weaponization research. In 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the JCPOA, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. He reinstated crippling economic sanctions on Iran, targeting its oil exports, banking sector, and military assets. This strategy, known as maximum pressure, aimed to force Iran into a more restrictive deal that also addressed its ballistic missile program and regional aggression. Israel supported the withdrawal and saw it as a step toward restraining Iran's power. However, the strategy also had unintended consequences. Iran resumed uranium enrichment, eventually reaching 60% purity close to weapons grade. Inspections became more limited as Iran retaliated against perceived Western betrayals. Tensions escalated in Iraq, Syria, and the Persian Gulf, including attacks on oil tankers and U.S. bases. With the election of President Joe Biden, efforts to revive the JCPOA resumed, but talks were slow. Complicated by hardliner gains in Iran's 2021 elections and mistrust between Tehran and Washington, Israel remained skeptical of renewed negotiations, though it did not openly oppose diplomacy. Israeli leaders urged tougher enforcement and longer restrictions. The Biden administration promised to consult Israel more closely, but disagreements remained. During this period, Iran crossed several thresholds, installing advanced centrifuges and enriching uranium well beyond JCPOA limits. While the IAEA continued inspections, they were increasingly restricted. As diplomacy stalled, Israel returned to open discussion of military options. In public speeches, Israeli leaders warned that they would act alone if necessary. Israeli defense forces conducted drills simulating long-range airstrikes, and reports emerged of plans to target Iranian nuclear facilities with bunker-busting bombs. Though such strikes would be complex and dangerous, Israeli leaders argue they may be necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring the capability to build a nuclear weapon. However, the risks of escalation, retaliation, and regional war are immense. The nuclear dimension of the Iran-Israel conflict has pushed both nations to the edge of war. For Israel, stopping Iran's nuclear program is a matter of survival. For Iran, developing advanced nuclear capabilities is a means of asserting regional power and deterring threats. Despite years of sabotage, diplomacy, and pressure, the issue remains unresolved. As of 2025, Iran has made significant technical progress. The shadow war continues, and the potential for a major escalation looms large. In the modern Middle East, the triangle of Israel, Iran, and the United States forms the foundation of much of the region's strategic tensions. Among the most defining features of the Iran-Israel conflict is the consistent and substantial support Israel receives from its most powerful ally, the United States of America. This alliance is not new. Since Israel's founding in 1948, U.S. support, both military and political, has been a central pillar of Israeli security. However, as Iran's power and hostility grew in the post-1979 era, American involvement evolved from diplomatic backing into a robust strategic partnership designed to counter Iranian influence. In this part, we'll explore how and why the U.S. became Israel's most significant backer, how this partnership has affected Israel's stance against Iran, and what the implications have been for regional security. The United States was among the first countries to recognize Israel after its declaration of independence in 1948. In the early decades, U.S. support was tempered by the Cold War context, where Washington also tried to maintain relationships with key Arab allies. But after the 1967 Six-Day War and Israel's decisive victory against Arab neighbors, the U.S.-Israel alliance deepened significantly. Military aid, intelligence cooperation, and diplomatic protection became central features of this relationship. By the 1970s and 1980s, Israel was receiving billions in military assistance and emerging as a key U.S. partner in the Cold War Middle East. This alignment hardened further after the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. The collapse of the Shah's regime, a key U.S. ally, and the seizure of the American embassy in Tehran marked a complete breakdown in U.S.-Iranian relations. In contrast, Israel's importance as a stable democratic partner grew exponentially. Today, Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II. As of 2025, the United States provides Israel with approximately $3.8 billion in annual military aid, most of it under a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding signed during the Obama administration. This support includes advanced weaponry, F-35 stealth fighters, precision-guided bombs, missile defense systems, and naval platforms. Missile defense systems. The U.S. has co-developed and co-funded systems like Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow, all aimed at defending Israel against short and long-range missiles, especially from Iran and its proxies. Stockpiles and intelligence. The U.S. maintains pre-positioned weapons in Israel and shares real-time intelligence about regional threats, including Iranian activity in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. This military support not only strengthens Israel's capacity to deter Iran, but also signals to Tehran that any attack on Israel risks drawing in the full power of the United States, U.S. Israeli defense ties extend beyond weapons. Both nations conduct regular joint military exercises, simulating scenarios such as defending against mass missile attacks, cyber warfare, and precision strikes on hardened targets clearly aimed at Iran's missile arsenal and nuclear infrastructure. The Juniper, Oak, and Juniper Falcon exercises, for instance, have trained both militaries in long-range bombing runs, aerial refueling, and air defense coordination. These drills serve not just tactical purposes, but also act as a form of psychological warfare, demonstrating to Iran the level of coordination and power the alliance can bring to bear. Additionally, U.S. Central Command, which oversees military operations in the Middle East, formally integrated Israel into its area of responsibility in 2021. This change allowed more seamless coordination between U.S. and Israeli forces in the region, particularly in countering Iran's expanding influence. Beyond military support, the United States has served as Israel's most reliable diplomatic shield, particularly in the United Nations. In the UN Security Council and other international forums, the U.S. frequently vetoes or blocks resolutions critical of Israel, including those calling for investigations into actions in Gaza or Israeli settlements. While some of these actions provoke criticism from other nations, they reflect a long-standing bipartisan consensus in Washington that Israel is a key ally deserving of protection. Regarding Iran, U.S. support has been critical in isolating Tehran through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and efforts to block weapons, sales, or arms deals. Few areas of U.S.-Israeli collaboration are more intense than intelligence sharing on Iran. Agencies like the CIA, NSA, and Israel's Mossad have worked together for decades to monitor Iran's nuclear program, missile development, and regional operations. Joint cyber initiatives, such as the Stuxnet operation, highlighted how the two countries share not only information, but technical and operational capabilities. According to leaked reports, Israel and the U.S. have also maintained listening posts, drone surveillance, and human intelligence networks inside Iran and its regional proxies. These efforts have helped map out Hezbollah's missile locations in Lebanon, monitor Iranian shipments to Syria, and uncover terrorist plots in the planning stages. While U.S. support for Israel has remained strong across administrations, the approach to Iran has varied widely. Obama administration championed the JCPOA, arguing it was the best way to prevent a nuclear Iran. Relations with Netanyahu were strained, especially over the 2015 U.S. Congress speech where Netanyahu lobbied against the deal. Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, imposed a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. increased military aid to Israel, and recognized Jerusalem as its capital. Targeted Iranian Quds, Force Commander Qasem Soleimani with a drone strike. Israel applauded these moves, which aligned closely with its strategic goals. Both Republican and Democratic lawmakers routinely pass pro-Israel resolutions, approve military aid packages, and echo Israeli concerns about Iran. While some progressive lawmakers have criticized Israeli actions in Gaza or settlements, criticism of the alliance itself remains rare at the policy level. Powerful lobbying groups like AIPAC and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies play key roles in sustaining bipartisan support for tough policies on Iran and aid to Israel. The strategic partnership between the U.S. and Israel has significant consequences for the broader Iran-Israel dynamic, encourages Israeli boldness, knowing it has American backup. Israel has taken more aggressive actions against Iran covert operations, airstrikes in Syria, and cyber attacks without fear of isolation. Strengthens Iranian hostility. Iran views the U.S.-Israel alliance as a colonial and imperialist axis, reinforcing its belief that military deterrence and resistance are essential for survival. Triggers regional realignments. Other countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain have drawn closer to Israel to balance Iran's growing power, leading to initiatives like the Abraham Accords, complicates U.S. diplomacy. The tight alliance limits U.S. options. When American presidents seek engagement with Iran, they face fierce resistance from Israeli leaders and domestic pro-Israel factions. United States is more than just a supporter of Israel-led, is a co-strategist in the campaign to contain and deter Iran. Through arms sales, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic muscle, the U.S. has empowered Israel to wage its multi-front campaign against Tehran. At the same time, this alliance limits diplomatic flexibility and raises the stakes of every confrontation. Iran sees both Israel and the U.S. as parts of a single threat. Thus, U.S. involvement does not simply reinforce Israeli power, it also deepens Iranian resistance and perpetuates the cycle of hostility. To understand the current conflict between Iran and Israel and the intense role the United States plays in it, we must examine how Iran and the U.S. went from close, Cold War allies to bitter enemies. This transformation, rooted in revolution, mistrust, and conflicting interests, reshaped the Middle East and set the stage for today's geopolitical alignments. This section will explore how the United States and Iran became partners under the Shah, how that partnership collapsed in 1979, and how the Islamic Republic came to define the U.S. as its greatest external adversary, second only to Israel. In the early 20th century, Iran was a kingdom with vast oil resources and deepening ties to the West. During the 1940s and 1950s, Britain and the U.S. had significant economic and political influence over the country, primarily through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. In 1953, the U.S. and U.K. orchestrated a cooperation Ajax that overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized Iran's oil industry. The coup reinstated Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a pro-Western monarch, who ruled with authoritarian control for the next 25 years. During this time, Iran became one of America's closest allies in the Middle East. The Shah purchased billions in American weapons, allowed U.S. companies to exploit oil and natural gas reserves, cooperated with Israel despite Iran being a majority Muslim nation, hosted American military and intelligence personnel on Iranian soil. In return, the U.S. offered military aid, advanced technology, and political support. Iran was seen as a stable, secular bulwark against Soviet expansionism and Arab nationalism. Despite the alliance, many Iranians grew resentful of the Shah's regime, which was seen as corrupt, repressive, and overly westernized. Key sources of discontent included SAVAK, the Shah's brutal secret police trained by the CIA and Mossad, which detained, tortured, and executed dissidents. A growing gap between rich elites and the poor, fueled by oil wealth and foreign investment. Perceived erosion of Islamic culture and identity under a modernizing monarchy. Deep anger over the 1953 coup, which was increasingly seen as foreign meddling in Iran's national sovereignty. Among the loudest critics of the Shah was a radical Shia cleric in exile, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. From his sanctuary in Iraq, Khomeini delivered sermons condemning the Shah's regime as illegitimate, denouncing Israel and the U.S. as great and little Satans. His message found an audience. By the late 1970s, Iran was on the brink of revolution. In early 1979, the Shah fled Iran amid mass protests, labor strikes, and nationwide unrest. Ayatollah Khomeini returned in triumph and established the Islamic Republic of Iran. The new regime replaced the monarchy with a theocracy, led by clerics and governed by Islamic law. This was more than a change in leadership. It was a complete transformation of Iran's identity and foreign policy. The Islamic Republic was built on three pillars: resistance to Western imperialism, opposition to Zionism, and the Israeli state. Exporting the Islamic Revolution to other Muslim nations for Iran, the United States quickly became enemy number one. Nothing symbolized the rupture between the U.S. and Iran more than the storming of the American embassy in Tehran. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students seized the embassy, taking 52 Americans hostage. They accused the U.S. of trying to reinstate the Shah, who had been admitted into the U.S. for medical treatment. The hostage crisis lasted 444 days, paralyzing diplomatic relations and dominating headlines in the U.S. This event transformed American perceptions of Iran. What had once been a friendly monarchy was now an anti-American theocracy, holding diplomats hostage and chanting death to America in the streets. In response, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions, froze Iranian assets, and cut all diplomatic ties a break that persists to this day. Shortly after the revolution, Iran was plunged into a devastating 8-year war with neighboring Iraq. Saddam Hussein invaded Iran in 1980, hoping to exploit Iran's internal chaos and stop the spread of Islamic revolution. The United States, viewing Iran as the greater threat, quietly backed Iraq. Though Saddam's regime was also brutal and dictatorial, it was secular and anti-Iranian. The U.S. provided Iraq with satellite intelligence, DULUs, materials that could be used in weapons production, diplomatic cover, despite Saddam's use of chemical weapons. This support further deepened Iranian hostility. To Tehran, the U.S. was enabling a genocidal war, while the world stood by. The war solidified Iran's identity as a besieged nation, surrounded by enemies, with America leading the charge. After the war ended in 1988, Iran remained under sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The U.S. maintained its hardline stance, accusing Iran of sponsoring terrorism opposing the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, seeking weapons of mass destruction during the Clinton administration. The U.S. enacted dual containment policy of isolating both Iraq and Iran. It also imposed new sanctions and designated Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism. Efforts to improve relations were limited. President Mohammad Khatami, elected in 1997, called for a dialogue of civilizations, but his overtures were largely ignored by Washington due to ongoing mistrust. After the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and later Iraq, countries bordering Iran. Iran initially cooperated with U.S. efforts to oust the Taliban, sharing intelligence and offering logistical support. But this cooperation was short-lived. In 2002, President George W. Bush labeled Iran part of the axis of evil, alongside Iraq and North Korea. This speech stunned Iranian moderates and empowered hardliners. Iran felt surrounded by U.S. military forces, with American troops stationed in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Persian Gulf, and Central Asia. This fueled paranoia in Tehran and accelerated its missile and nuclear programs as deterrents. As detailed in earlier parts of this script, President Barack Obama attempted diplomacy, culminating in the JCPO. President Donald Trump exited the deal in 2018 and reimposed crippling sanctions. Iran responded by resuming enrichment and growing closer to Russia and China. The back and forth cemented Iran's view that the U.S. could not be trusted, regardless of administration. Meanwhile, American hawks insisted that Iran's regime would never change its behavior through diplomacy alone. Unable to confront the U.S. directly, Iran adopted a strategy of asymmetric warfare. Attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq. Through Shia militia's seizure of oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, development of long-range drones and cruise missiles. Cyber attacks against American infrastructure. This gray zone warfare has kept the U.S. and Iran in a state of constant low-level conflict. Never fully at war, but never at peace. The 2020 assassination of General Qasem Soleimani marked a peak in tensions. Iran's retaliatory missile strike on U.S. bases in Iraq caused no deaths, but sent a clear message. Iran would not back down. The collapse of the U.S.-Iran alliance after 1979 set off a chain of events that continues to shape the Middle East. The Islamic Republic views America as the ultimate imperialist power complicit in the Shah's repression, Saddam's war crimes, and Israel's regional hegemony. For the United States, Iran remains a hostile power bent on destabilizing its allies, attacking its forces, and threatening global energy supplies. The two countries' enmity has fueled proxy wars, sabotaged peace efforts, and made any resolution to the Israel-Iran conflict vastly more complex. Though Israel and Iran have never engaged in a formal war, their conflict has been anything but peaceful. Instead of direct confrontation, the two nations have fought a long and complicated proxy war, using third parties, local militias, political allies, and covert operations across the region. This section explores how this conflict plays out through armed proxies and foreign arenas, turning countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Gaza, and Yemen into volatile battlegrounds. The result is a wide-scale, decentralized, and unpredictable war that continues to destabilize the Middle East. The most powerful and long-standing Iranian proxy is Hezbollah, a Shia militant and political group based in Lebanon. Formed in the early 1980s during Israel's invasion of Lebanon, Hezbollah was created with Iranian funding and trained by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It combines a powerful militia with a political party that holds seats in Lebanon's parliament. Capabilities: more than 150,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel, advanced drones, anti-tank weapons, and hardened bunkers. A sophisticated command structure integrated with Iran's Quds Force. Engagement with Israel, regular skirmishes along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Major war in 2006, where Hezbollah launched thousands of rockets into northern Israel. Near constant preparation for another large-scale confrontation, with Israeli officials warning that the next war could involve massive missile barrages. Hezbollah allows Iran to keep constant pressure on Israel from the north, while providing Tehran with plausible deniability. For Israel, Hezbollah is seen as Iran's front line in any future war. Syria, ravaged by civil war since 2011, has become a major theater for Iranian-Israeli confrontation. Iran's strategy: Iran supports President Bashar al-Assad, sending IRGC personnel, Hezbollah fighters, Shia militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. In exchange for its support, Iran has built military bases and weapons factories across Syria, particularly near Damascus and close to the Israeli border in the Golan Heights. Israel's response: hundreds of airstrikes targeting Iranian convoys, missile depots, and Hezbollah positions. Operations like Chariots of Fire and Breaking Dawn. To prevent Iranian entrenchment, assassinations of Iranian officers and air defense specialists inside Syria. The Israeli Air Force regularly conducts strikes deep into Syrian territory with near impunity, signaling a clear message: Iran will not be allowed to build a permanent military presence next door. Despite these efforts, Iran continues to rebuild and expand its footprint. Syria remains a powder keg. One miscalculation could spark a broader war. In the Gaza Strip, Iranian support fuels regular conflict between Israel and Palestinian militant groups. Iran's role: funds and arms Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Helps with the local manufacturing of rockets, drones, and improvised explosive devices. Provides training and strategic advice, often via Hezbollah intermediaries. While Hamas is Sunni, Islamist, and Iran is Shia, both share a mutual hatred for Israel. Their cooperation underscores Iran's broader strategy: support any group willing to fight Israel, regardless of sectarian affiliation. Major conflicts: 2014 Gaza War, May 2021 conflict, ongoing rocket attacks, and border clashes. Israel views Gaza not just as a security threat, but as part of Iran's regional web of influence. Iran's backing enables these groups to develop more sophisticated weaponry and maintain a consistent state of conflict with Israel. After the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, Iran saw an opportunity to extend its reach. Iranian proxies Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, Badr organization, these Shia militias, form part of the Popular Mobilization Forces and receive funding, weapons, and training from Iran's Quds Force. While primarily focused on U.S. forces, these groups have also targeted Israeli-linked assets in the Kurdish region, sent drones and missiles toward U.S. bases where Israeli contractors were present, supported Iran's regional logistics and weapons transfer routes through Iraq to Syria and Lebanon. Iraq has become a critical hub in the Iran-Israel conflict, especially as Israel increases intelligence operations to monitor convoys and strike targets. Though geographically distant from Israel, the Houthi rebels in Yemen play a small but growing role in Iran's proxy strategy. The Houthi Asaya Zaidi group, aligned with Iran, have fought a brutal civil war against a Saudi-led coalition since 2015. In recent years, Iran has provided ballistic missile and drone technology, used Yemen as a launchpad for long-range drone strikes, including potential threats to Israel, supported Houthi rhetoric declaring solidarity with Palestinians and Hezbollah. While direct attacks on Israel from Yemen are rare, the Houthis add another layer of threat to Israel's south. During recent escalations, the Houthis have threatened to target Israeli ports and infrastructure with Iranian-provided long-range missiles. Iran and Israel also clash in the maritime domain. In the Persian Gulf, Red Sea, and Eastern Mediterranean, both countries have carried out attacks on each other's ships. Key incidents: 2021, Israeli-owned MV Helios Ray struck by an explosion in the Gulf of Oman. Iran-linked tankers hit by mysterious limpet mines near the Syrian coast. Naval sabotage and drone strikes targeting oil tankers, commercial vessels, and arms shipments. These incidents rarely lead to open war, but are part of the growing shadow Navy conflict, where both sides use maritime attacks to disrupt each other's influence, test responses, and gain leverage. While not a traditional proxy, cyber warfare is another key front where Iran and Israel use third-party hackers, front companies, and anonymous malware to wage war. Notable examples: Stuxnet, U.S.-Israeli cyber weapon, damaged Iran's Natanz centrifuges. Shamoon malware, linked to Iranian hackers targeting Saudi and Israeli infrastructure. Water system attacks. Iran allegedly tried to hack Israeli water treatment plants. Israeli retaliations. Cyber acts on Iranian ports, oil terminals, and train systems. Cyber proxies blur national boundaries, allow plausible deniability, and can inflict massive damage without firing a shot. The danger of proxy warfare lies in its unpredictability. A rocket misfire in Lebanon, an assassination in Syria, or a drone strike from Iraq could easily spark a direct war between Israel and Iran. Each nation walks a tightrope, trying to damage the other without igniting a full-scale regional conflict. The 2023 war in Gaza, for example, nearly drew in Hezbollah and Iran after Israeli strikes hit suspected Iranian operatives in Syria. Cooler heads prevailed, but the incident showed how close the region hovers to widespread escalation. For Iran, expands regional influence without committing national forces, creates multiple fronts to exhaust Israeli resources, avoids direct confrontation with a superior Israeli military, leverages ideology to build alliances with disenfranchised Muslim groups. For Israel, uses air power and intelligence to strike Iranian proxies from a distance, avoids deploying ground troops or engaging in drawn-out wars, justifies preemptive defense doctrine striking before Iran can entrench itself. This chessboard of proxy warfare has allowed both sides to avoid direct war so far. But the risks grow with each strike, and the regional landscape continues to shift. Proxy warfare is the preferred method of battle in the Iran-Israel conflict. It allows both countries to test each other's limits, inflict damage, and influence regional dynamics without the costs of open war. But it comes at a price. Endless instability. Suffering among civilians in places like Gaza, Syria, and Yemen. And a hair-trigger environment where one misstep could lead to catastrophe. Where does the Iran-Israel conflict go from here? The conflict between Iran and Israel is one of the most complex and dangerous in modern history. Rooted in deep ideological divides, historic grievances, and geopolitical rivalry. It has grown over decades into a multi-layered confrontation involving proxy wars, covert operations, and global power struggles. The United States' involvement has added further dimensions, shaping the conflict's evolution and its impact on regional and international security. Recap of the main roots of conflict, to summarize. Historical tensions began long before the Islamic Republic, with Iran's strategic interests clashing with Israel's desire for regional security and recognition. The 1979 Iranian Revolution transformed Iran into a theocratic regime fundamentally opposed to Israel's existence and its influence in the Middle East. Proxy warfare became the primary battlefield, with Iran supporting groups like Hezbollah and Hamas to challenge Israel indirectly. The United States' unwavering alliance with Israel, including military, intelligence, and diplomatic backing, has bolstered Israel's ability to deter and confront Iran, but also entrenched hostility. Global powers such as Russia, China, and European nations play significant roles, either enabling, mediating, or complicating the conflict. The ongoing risks, the stakes remain extraordinarily high. A direct war between Iran and Israel could escalate into a regional or even global conflict, potentially drawing in the United States, Gulf states, Russia, and others. The presence of nuclear capabilities remains a constant concern. Israel is widely believed to possess nuclear weapons, while Iran's nuclear ambitions, if realized, would dramatically alter the strategic balance. The conflict also perpetuates humanitarian crisis civilian populations in Lebanon. Gaza, Syria, and Iran suffer as proxies and militias engage in repeated violence. Future prospects: the future is uncertain, but several scenarios are possible. Escalation without restraint. Miscalculations could lead to full-scale war involving massive airstrikes, missile exchanges, and ground operations. Stalemate. Proxy conflicts may continue indefinitely, with neither side able or willing to fully dominate the other. Diplomatic breakthrough. Renewed negotiations and confidence building could eventually open paths to de-escalation and limited normalization. What would peace require? Real peace between Israel and Iran would require recognition. Iran would need to accept Israel's right to exist, while Israel would have to ease its hostility toward Iran's government. Security guarantees. Robust international guarantees preventing nuclear proliferation and proxy attacks. Regional cooperation. Inclusive dialogues involving other Middle Eastern states to address security concerns collectively. Trust building. Measures to reduce misinformation, propaganda, and cycles of revenge. The role of the international community. The world's powers have a critical role in shaping the conflict's future. They can encourage dialogue and compromise rather than confrontation. Support humanitarian efforts for civilians caught in the crossfire. Promote arms control and non-proliferation initiatives. Help build frameworks for regional security that reduce dependence on hostile posturing. Final thoughts. The conflict between Iran and Israel will not be solved overnight. It is the product of decades of mistrust, ideological opposition, and power struggles that go far beyond the two nations themselves. Yet, even in this deeply polarized and dangerous environment, the possibility for change exists. History shows that adversaries can find common ground when the costs of conflict become too great and when leaders and peoples demand peace. Understanding the roots, the players, and the global dynamics at work is essential for anyone who hopes to grasp the magnitude of this conflict and its impact on the world. The challenge now lies with those who hold power both in Tehran, Jerusalem, Washington, and beyond to find the courage and wisdom to chart a more peaceful future for the region and the world. Thank you for following this deep dive into the roots of the Israel-Iran conflict and the United States' role. If you'd like, I can now help you format this entire script for your video or provide additional materials like timelines, summaries, or visuals. Just let me know.